Jake Morrison had been running cattle on his family's ranch in eastern Colorado for 37 years, and he thought he'd seen everything nature could throw at him. Blizzards that buried fence posts, tornadoes that picked up his barn and set it down 3 counties over, and droughts so severe the ground cracked like broken pottery. But nothing had prepared him for the morning of May 15th, when the worst storm system in decades tore through the plains. The tornado had touched down just after midnight, a monster that carved a path of destruction 20 miles long and half a mile wide. Jake had huddled in his storm cellar with his wife Sarah and their 2 teenage daughters, listening to the freight train roar of wind overhead as it devoured everything in its path. When morning came and the wind finally died, they emerged to find their world transformed. Where his neighbor's farmhouse had stood for 80 years, there was now only a concrete foundation and scattered debris. The old oak tree that had shaded his front porch was gone, uprooted and hurled into the next pasture. Power lines dangled like broken spider webs, and the air smelled of wet earth and splintered wood. Jake's first priority was his livestock. He needed to check the cattle, make sure none were injured or trapped. As he walked across his property, his boots crunching on hail that lay thick as snow, he could see the tornado's path clearly marked across the landscape. It had missed his house by less than 200 yards, but it had taken everything in its direct route. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the fog that clung to the devastated ground. Jake carried a pair of wire cutters and a first aid kit, expecting to find injured animals caught in twisted fencing. What he didn't expect was to hear a sound that made his blood run cold. The weak cry of a human baby. Carried on the morning breeze, Jake stopped walking and tilted his head, straining to listen. The cry came again. Faint, but unmistakable. It seemed to be coming from the direction of what had been the Hendricks trailer home, about half a mile from his property line. The Hendricks family had moved away 6 months ago, and Jake thought the place was empty. But that sound, that was definitely a baby crying. He began to run, his 55-year-old legs carrying him faster than they had in years. As he got closer to where the trailer had been, he could see that the tornado had completely destroyed it. Pieces of siding and roofing were scattered across a wide area, mixed with personal belongings and furniture. A refrigerator sat upright in the middle of what used to be a wheat field, its door hanging open like a gaping mouth. The crying was getting louder now, more desperate. Jake climbed over a pile of debris that had once been someone's home, calling out, "Hello? Is someone there? Can you hear me?" The only answer was the continued wailing of the infant. Then he saw it, a small section of what looked like a concrete storm shelter, partially buried under a massive pile of twisted metal roofing, wooden beams, and chunks of concrete. The structure was completely crushed, no more than 2 feet high where it should have been 6 feet. Jake's heart sank. Nobody could survive being trapped under all that weight, but the crying was definitely coming from inside. Jake began pulling away debris with his bare hands, throwing aside pieces of metal siding and chunks of wood. His hands were bleeding within minutes, but he didn't notice. The baby's cries were weaker now, which made him work faster. Every few seconds, he would call out, "I'm here, I'm going to get you out," hoping that if there was an adult in there with the baby, they would know help had arrived. As he cleared away more debris, Jake could see that the shelter had been built into a hillside, and the tornado had collapsed most of it. But there appeared to be a small pocket of space near what had been the entrance, protected by a heavy concrete lintel that had held firm even under the enormous weight above it. The space was no more than 18 inches high, but it was something. "Hello?" Jake called again, his voice hoarse from shouting. This time, he heard something that made his heart race. A woman's voice, so faint he could barely make it out. "Help us," the voice whispered. "Please help us." Jake dropped to his knees and pressed his face close to a small gap in the debris. "I'm here," he shouted. "I'm going to get you out. Are you hurt?" "I can't move," came the reply. "The baby. Please get the baby." Jake could see now that the gap was too small for a person to fit through, but it was the only opening he could find. The entire structure was pinned under tons of concrete and twisted metal. He would need heavy equipment to move most of it. Equipment he didn't have. And that might not arrive for hours. He ran back to his truck and grabbed his cell phone. but there was no signal. The tornado had taken out the cell towers along with everything else. His radio was also dead. Jake realized he was completely on his own. Returning to the shelter, he called out again. "What's your name? How long have you been trapped?" "Mary," the voice replied, slightly stronger now. "Mary Gonzalez. We've been here since the storm hit. I think it's been hours. Is the baby hurt?" "I don't know. She hasn't been crying as much. I think she's getting weak." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool morning air. A baby could die quickly from dehydration or hypothermia, especially after being trapped for hours in a cold, confined space. He had to find a way to get them out, and he had to do it fast. He began examining the pile of debris more carefully, looking for any weakness, any spot where he might be able to create a larger opening. The concrete lintel was holding up most of the weight, but it was also blocking access to the shelter. If he could somehow move some of the smaller pieces of debris, he might be able to reach in and pull them out. Jake found a piece of rebar sticking out from under a chunk of concrete and tried to use it as a lever. The metal bent, but didn't give way. He tried again, putting his full weight behind it, and managed to shift a piece of roofing material a few inches. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Mary, I'm going to try to make the opening bigger," he called. "Keep talking to me, so I know you're okay." "Okay," Mary replied. Her voice sounded tired, defeated. "Thank you for coming, I thought. I thought no one would find us." "How old is the baby?" 6 months. Her name is Sophia. She's my granddaughter." Jake's hands were working frantically now, pulling away any loose pieces he could move. Each small piece he removed made the opening a tiny bit larger. He could feel the weight of all that debris pressing down, and he knew that one wrong move could cause the entire pile to shift and crush the pocket of space where Mary and Sophia were trapped. "What were you doing here?" Jake asked, partly to keep Mary talking, and partly because he was genuinely curious. He'd thought the place was empty. "We were staying here temporarily," Mary explained. "My daughter and her husband are deployed overseas. Military. I was watching Sophia while they're gone. The trailer was too expensive, but the shelter was still good. We've been living here for 2 weeks." Jake's heart ached for this woman who had been trying to make do with so little, only to be caught in the worst storm in decades. He redoubled his efforts, ignoring the pain in his bleeding hands. After 20 minutes of careful work, Jake had managed to create an opening about the size of a large dinner plate. It still wasn't big enough for an adult, but he might be able to reach the baby. "Mary, I've made the hole bigger. Can you see any light?" "Yes, I can see light." "Oh, thank God. I'm going to try to reach in and get the baby. Can you move her toward the opening?" There was a pause, and Jake heard Mary groaning with effort. "I'm pinned," she said finally. "My legs are trapped under something heavy. I can't move much, but I can try to push her toward you." Jake lay flat on his stomach and reached through the opening. His shoulder was too wide to fit very far, but he could get his arm through up to his elbow. He felt around blindly in the darkness. "I can feel her," he called out. His fingertips had brushed against something soft, a baby's clothing. "Can you push her a little more toward me?" "I'm trying," Mary groaned. Jake could hear her struggling, breathing heavily with the effort. Sophia was crying again now, which Jake took as a good sign. At least she was still conscious and alert. He managed to get his hand around the baby's tiny arm and began gently pulling her toward the opening. "Easy, little one," he murmured. "Uncle Jake's going to get you out of there." It was slow, delicate work. Jake had to be careful not to hurt the baby, while also making sure he didn't cause any of the debris to shift. Sophia was wearing only a diaper and a thin shirt, and Jake could feel how cold she was. Her skin was like ice. Inch by inch, Jake worked the baby toward the opening. Mary was helping as much as she could, pushing from her end. Finally, Jake was able to get both hands around Sophia's tiny body and pull her free. The baby was unconscious now. Her lips blue with cold. Jake immediately wrapped her in his jacket and held her close to his chest, trying to warm her with his body heat. She was breathing, but barely. "I've got her," he called to Mary. "She's alive. Thank God, Mary sobbed. Is she okay? Jake honestly didn't know. The baby was severely hypothermic and possibly dehydrated. She needed medical attention immediately. But the nearest hospital was 40 miles away, and with the roads likely blocked by debris, it might as well have been 400 miles. She needs to get warm, Jake called back. I'm going to take her to my house and get her warmed up. Then I'll come back for you. No, Mary's voice was panicked. Don't leave me. Please don't leave me here alone. Jake was torn. The baby needed immediate attention, but he couldn't bear the thought of leaving Mary trapped and alone. He looked down at Sophia, who was so still and cold in his arms. He had to make a choice, and he had to make it fast. Mary, I have to get the baby warm or she might die, Jake said as gently as he could. My house is only half a mile away. I'll be back in 30 minutes. I promise. What if more debris falls while you're gone? Mary asked, her voice breaking. What if I don't make it? Jake looked at the pile of debris above Mary's shelter. It looked stable for now. But she was right. Another shift could be fatal. He made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. I'm going to stay, he said. But I need to figure out how to warm up the baby. Jake took off his shirt and wrapped it around Sophia, in addition to his jacket. Then, he tucked the bundled baby inside his undershirt, against his bare chest. His own body heat would have to be enough for now. Mary, I'm staying right here. I'm going to keep working on getting you out. Thank you, Mary whispered. I was so scared you were going to leave. Jake began working on the opening again, this time trying to make it large enough for Mary to fit through. With the baby safely out, he could take bigger risks, move larger pieces of debris, but he had to be careful. Mary was pinned underneath, and any major shift could crush her. The sun was getting higher now, and Jake was sweating from his efforts despite the cool air. Sophia seemed to be warming up against his chest, and she had even opened her eyes a few times, but she still wasn't crying, which worried him. Mary, can you tell me exactly how you're pinned? I need to know what I'm dealing with. There's a concrete block across my legs, Mary replied, and something heavy on my back. I think it's part of a beam. I can move my arms, but I can't sit up. Jake could see now that this was going to be much more complicated than he'd hoped. Mary wasn't just trapped by debris that had fallen on top of the shelter. She was actually pinned under heavy structural elements that had collapsed into the shelter itself. He was going to need help. But with no way to communicate with the outside world, Jake realized that help might not come for hours or even days. The main roads were almost certainly blocked, and rescue crews would be focused on the populated areas first. This remote farmhouse might not be reached until much later. Jake made another difficult decision. He was going to have to try to free Mary himself, using nothing but his bare hands and whatever tools he could improvise from the debris around him. The baby stirred against his chest, and Jake felt a small spark of hope. Sophia was getting warmer, and her breathing seemed stronger. If he could just figure out how to get Mary out, they might both survive this ordeal. Jake had no idea that this was just the beginning of a rescue that would test every ounce of strength, determination, and ingenuity he possessed. The hardest part was yet to come. Jake knelt beside the small opening, cradling Sophia against his chest while studying the pile of debris that trapped Mary. The baby had stopped shivering, which he hoped was a good sign. Her tiny fingers occasionally grasped at his undershirt, and her breathing had become more regular. But Mary's situation was growing more desperate by the hour. Mary, I need you to help me understand exactly what's on top of you, Jake said, trying to keep his voice calm and confident. Can you feel around and tell me what you're touching? He heard Mary shifting slightly inside the cramped space. There's definitely concrete on my legs, she said after a moment. It feels smooth on one side, rough on the other. And there's something metal digging into my back. It's really heavy. Jake examined the debris pile more carefully. He could see the edge of what looked like a concrete cinder block near the opening, and twisted metal that might have been part of a roof support beam. The tornado had essentially turned the small storm shelter into a concrete and steel sandwich, with Mary trapped in the filling. Can you feel your legs? Any numbness or tingling? They hurt, Mary replied, which Jake took as a positive sign. No feeling would have been much worse. But I can wiggle my toes. I think the concrete is sitting on my shins, not crushing them completely. Jake set Sophia down gently on his jacket, which he'd spread on a clear patch of ground. The baby seemed stable for now, and he needed both hands free to work. He began probing around the edges of the debris pile, looking for any leverage points or weak spots. The problem was that everything was interconnected. The concrete block on Mary's legs was being held in place by the metal beam, which in turn was trapped under a large piece of the shelter's roof. Moving any one piece would require moving several others, and Jake didn't have the tools or strength for that kind of operation. But as he examined the pile more closely, Jake noticed something that gave him an idea. The metal beam wasn't actually resting directly on Mary. It was caught on another piece of debris, about 6 inches above her. If he could somehow lift it just a few more inches, Mary might be able to slide out from underneath. "Mary, I think I see a way to get you out," Jake called. "But it's going to require you to move quickly when I tell you to. Are you ready for that?" "I'll try," Mary replied, though her voice sounded weaker than before. "I'm getting really tired." Jake knew that wasn't a good sign. Mary had been trapped for hours now, and shock and exhaustion were starting to set in. He had to work fast. He found a long piece of rebar that had been part of the shelter's reinforcement and managed to work one end of it under the metal beam. Using a chunk of concrete as a fulcrum, he had created a crude but potentially effective lever. "Mary, when I count to 3, I'm going to lift the beam. You need to slide toward me as fast as you can. Don't worry about the concrete on your legs. Just pull yourself forward with your arms. Ready?" "Ready," Mary said, and Jake could hear the determination in her voice despite her exhaustion. 1, 2, 3. Jake threw his full weight against the rebar lever. The metal beam groaned and shifted upward about 3 inches. It wasn't much, but it might be enough. "Now, Mary, move now." Jake heard Mary grunting with effort, and he could see the concrete block shifting as she pulled herself forward. For a moment, it looked like she was going to make it, but then the rebar bent under the strain, the beam dropped back down, and Mary cried out in pain. "Are you hurt?" Jake asked frantically. "My ankle," Mary gasped. "I think something twisted when the beam came down." Jake cursed under his breath. The makeshift lever had failed, and now Mary might be injured worse than before. He needed a different approach. Looking around desperately, Jake spotted something that might help, a car jack lying in the debris field. It had apparently been blown from someone's garage by the tornado. The jack was dented but looked functional. "Mary, I found a car jack. I'm going to try to use it to lift the debris off you. It might take a while, but I think it will work." Jake positioned the jack under the metal beam and began cranking the handle. Slowly, very slowly, the beam began to rise. 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches. The jack was working, but it was taking forever, and Jake was worried it might not be strong enough to hold the weight. When the beam had been lifted about 6 inches, Jake heard a concerning crack from somewhere in the debris pile. He stopped cranking immediately. "Mary, can you move at all now?" "A little," Mary replied. "The pressure on my back is less, but the concrete block is still on my legs." Jake realized he was going to have to lift the beam even higher to free the concrete block. But the ominous crack he'd heard suggested that the debris pile was becoming unstable. If it collapsed while he was working, it could kill Mary instantly. He made another difficult decision. Instead of trying to lift everything at once, he would work on freeing Mary's legs first. Using his hands, Jake began carefully digging around the concrete block, trying to create enough space for Mary to pull her legs free. The work was slow and dangerous. Every few minutes, something would shift in the pile above, and Jake would freeze, waiting to see if the whole thing would come crashing down. But gradually, he managed to clear enough space around the block. "Mary, I think there's enough room now. Can you try to pull your legs out?" Mary tried, but she was too weak. Hours of being trapped had sapped her strength, and she couldn't generate enough force to free herself. "I can't," she said. And Jake could hear that she was starting to cry. I just can't do it. Jake realized he was going to have to reach in and help her. The opening was still too small for him to fit through, but he might be able to get both arms inside and help pull her legs free. Lying flat on his stomach, Jake reached through the opening with both arms. He could feel Mary's legs, trapped under the edge of the concrete block. Working carefully, he managed to get his hands around her ankles. This might hurt, he warned her. I'm going to pull steady and firm. Try to help if you can. Jake began pulling, gently at first, then with increasing force, as he felt Mary's legs starting to move. Mary was crying out with pain, but her legs were coming free. Inch by inch, Jake worked her legs out from under the concrete. Finally, Mary's legs were free. But she was still trapped by the beam across her back, and Jake could see that she was too weak to crawl out on her own. Mary, I'm going to grab your arms and pull you out. It's going to hurt, but it's the only way. Jake reached back through the opening and found Mary's wrists. She was barely conscious now, mumbling something he couldn't understand. Jake knew he was running out of time. Bracing his feet against the debris pile, Jake began pulling Mary toward the opening. She was a small woman, probably no more than 120 pounds. But she was dead weight now, and the opening was still very narrow. Jake had to pull her through inch by inch, twisting and maneuvering her body to fit through the space. Mary's shirt caught on a piece of jagged metal and tore. Jake felt her skin scraping against the concrete as he pulled her through. He hated hurting her, but he had no choice. If he didn't get her out soon, she would die in there. After what felt like hours but was probably only 10 minutes, Jake finally pulled Mary's head and shoulders through the opening. Her face was pale and streaked with dirt and blood, but she was breathing. Jake repositioned himself and pulled again, this time getting her whole upper body out. One more pull, and Mary was free. She collapsed on the ground beside the opening, unconscious but alive. Jake quickly checked her pulse and breathing. Both were weak but steady. Jake now had a new problem. He had an unconscious woman and a 6-month-old baby, and he was stranded in a disaster area with no communication and no transportation. His truck was back at his house, but it was too far to carry both Mary and Sophia. He looked around desperately and spotted something that might help. A wheelbarrow that had apparently been blown from someone's yard. It was dented, but looked like it might still roll. Working quickly, Jake fashioned a makeshift stretcher using the wheelbarrow and some pieces of tarp he found in the debris. It wasn't comfortable, but it would allow him to transport both Mary and Sophia at the same time. He placed Mary gently in the wheelbarrow, then tucked Sophia inside his shirt again to keep her warm. The baby was awake now and looking around with wide eyes, though she still wasn't making much noise. The journey back to Jake's house was a nightmare. The wheelbarrow's wheel was bent, causing it to pull to one side, and the ground was littered with debris that made pushing it nearly impossible. Every few yards, Jake had to stop and lift the wheelbarrow over or around some obstacle. Mary regained consciousness about halfway there, groaning and trying to sit up. Lie still, Jake told her. We're almost to my house. You're going to be okay. Sophia, Mary mumbled. Where's Sophia? Jake opened his shirt slightly so Mary could see the baby nestled against his chest. She's right here. She's doing much better. Mary tried to smile but winced in pain instead. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for saving us. When Jake finally reached his house, he was exhausted and drenched in sweat despite the cool morning air. His wife Sarah came running out, having been watching for him anxiously. Oh my God, Jake. What happened? Who are these people? Tornado victims, Jake explained quickly. They were trapped under debris. The baby's hypothermic, and the woman might have internal injuries. We need to get them warm and call for medical help. Sarah immediately took charge. She was a former nurse and knew exactly what to do. While Jake carried Mary inside, Sarah prepared warm blankets and started a fire in the fireplace. The phones are all dead, Sarah said. But I heard on the battery radio that rescue crews are working their way out from town. They should reach us by afternoon. Jake helped Sarah get Mary settled on the couch near the fire. The woman was conscious but clearly in pain. Sarah examined her carefully and concluded that while she was injured, nothing seemed life-threatening. Sophia was a bigger concern. The baby was severely dehydrated and still suffering from hypothermia. Sarah worked to warm her gradually, while trying to get small amounts of water into her. "This baby needs a hospital," Sarah said quietly to Jake. "Soon." "Soon." Jake nodded grimly. The nearest hospital was in the county seat, 40 miles away, over roads that were probably blocked by debris. Even if rescue crews reached them that afternoon, it might be too late for Sophia. But then Jake heard something that made his heart leap. The distant sound of a helicopter. He ran outside and saw a military rescue helicopter approaching from the east, probably from the Air Force Base, 2 counties over. Jake grabbed a bright orange tarp from his garage and spread it on his front lawn, then began waving his arms frantically. The helicopter pilot saw him and began circling, looking for a place to land. The helicopter touched down in Jake's pasture, and 2 paramedics jumped out and ran toward the house. Jake quickly explained the situation, and within minutes, both Mary and Sophia were being examined by trained medical professionals. "You did good work," one of the paramedics told Jake. "The baby's stable, and the woman's injuries aren't as serious as they could have been. A few more hours out there, though, and it might have been a different story." As Jake watched the helicopter lift off with Mary and Sophia aboard, bound for the regional trauma center, he felt a mixture of exhaustion and overwhelming relief. They had made it, against all odds, using nothing but his determination and his bare hands. He had pulled 2 lives from what should have been their grave. Sarah put her arm around her husband's waist as they watched the helicopter disappear into the distance. "You're a hero," she said simply. Jake shook his head. "I just did what anyone would do." But deep down, Jake knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would have spent hours digging through debris with bleeding hands. Not everyone would have risked their own safety to save strangers. Not everyone would have refused to give up when the situation seemed hopeless. Jake Morrison was a hero, even if he was too modest to admit it. And in the days to come, as word of his rescue spread, the entire community would agree. 3 days after the rescue, Jake Morrison sat in the waiting room of St. Mary's Regional Medical Center, holding a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The hospital corridors buzzed with activity as medical staff treated dozens of tornado victims from across the region. But Jake's attention was focused entirely on room 314, where Mary Gonzalez was recovering from surgery to repair torn ligaments in her ankle and treat severe dehydration. Sophia was doing much better. The baby had bounced back with the remarkable resilience that only the very young seem to possess. After 2 days of IV fluids and round-the-clock monitoring, she was alert, smiling, and causing a minor sensation among the nursing staff, with her bright eyes and infectious giggle. "Mr. Morrison?" A doctor in surgical scrubs approached. "I'm Dr. Patterson. I've been treating Mrs. Gonzalez." Jake stood up quickly, nearly spilling his coffee. "How is she?" "She's going to make a full recovery," Dr. Patterson said with a smile. "The ankle surgery went well, and her other injuries were less severe than we initially thought. She's awake now, and asking to see you." Jake felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. For 3 days, he'd been haunted by the fear that Mary might not make it, that despite all his efforts, he might have been too late. Mary was sitting up in her hospital bed when Jake entered the room, looking pale but alert. Sophia was in her arms, dressed in a tiny pink hospital gown that made her look impossibly small and fragile. "Jake," Mary said, her eyes filling with tears, "I don't know how to thank you. The doctors told me what you did. They said you probably saved both our lives." Jake shifted uncomfortably, never good with praise or gratitude. "I just did what needed doing," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Sore, but grateful to be alive." Mary looked down at Sophia, who was contentedly sucking on her fingers. "The doctors said if we'd been trapped much longer, especially Sophia, we might not have made it. The hypothermia was getting dangerous." Over the next hour, Jake learned more about Mary's story. She had been caring for Sophia while her daughter Carmen and son-in-law deployed with the army to Afghanistan. Money was tight on a military salary, and the family couldn't afford both rent for the trailer and payments on their small storm shelter. When the landlord raised the rent, they'd made the difficult decision to move into the shelter temporarily. It was supposed to be just for a few months, Mary explained, until Carmen and David came back from deployment. We never expected something like this. Jake felt a surge of anger at a system that could leave a grandmother and baby living in a storm shelter because they couldn't afford proper housing. But he kept his feelings to himself, focusing instead on the fact that they were alive and safe. "Where will you go now?" Jake asked. Mary's face clouded over. "I don't know. The shelter is completely destroyed, and we lost everything. Carmen doesn't know what happened yet. Communication with their base is limited. I've been trying to figure out what to do." Jake made a decision that surprised even him. "You'll come stay with us," he said firmly. "Sarah and I have plenty of room, and you'll need somewhere to recover anyway." Mary started to protest, but Jake held up his hand. "No arguments. You're family now, as far as we're concerned." When Jake returned home that evening to discuss the arrangement with Sarah, he found his wife already preparing the guest room. "I figured you'd invite them to stay," Sarah said with a knowing smile. "I've been married to you for 32 years, Jake Morrison. I know exactly what kind of man you are." Word of Jake's rescue had spread quickly through the community, despite his attempts to downplay the story. The local newspaper had gotten hold of it, and then the regional TV stations picked it up. Within a week, Jake found himself the subject of news stories across the state. The attention made Jake deeply uncomfortable. Reporters showed up at his ranch, asking him to recreate the rescue for their cameras. He refused, insisting that he wasn't a hero, and that anyone else would have done the same thing. "But not everyone would have spent hours digging through debris with their bare hands," pointed out Jennifer Walsh, a reporter from the state capitol. "Not everyone would have risked their own safety to save strangers." "They would if they heard a baby crying," Jake insisted stubbornly. Despite Jake's reluctance to embrace his hero status, the community had other ideas. The local Rotary Club wanted to give him an award. The state legislature passed a resolution honoring his actions. The governor's office called to arrange a commendation ceremony. Jake tried to refuse all of it, but Sarah finally put her foot down. "Jake Morrison, you listen to me," she said one evening as they sat on their front porch, watching the sunset. "You don't get to decide whether you're a hero or not. Other people get to decide that. And right now, this community needs heroes. This whole region has been through hell, and people need to believe that there are still good folks out there willing to help their neighbors." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "I just don't like all the attention," he said finally. "I know you don't," Sarah replied gently. "But sometimes doing the right thing means accepting recognition you don't want." Mary and Sophia had been staying with the Morrisons for 2 weeks when Carmen called from Afghanistan. The young soldier had finally been able to get through to her mother, and the conversation was emotional for everyone involved. "I can't believe you almost lost her." Carmen sobbed over the crackling international connection. "I can't believe I wasn't there." It's not your fault, Mija," Mary said firmly. "You're serving your country. Sophia and I are safe now, thanks to Mr. Morrison." "I want to talk to him," Carmen said. "I want to thank him." Jake was reluctant to take the phone, but Mary insisted. The conversation was brief. International calls were expensive, but Carmen's gratitude was overwhelming. "Mr. Morrison, I don't have words for what you did," the young soldier said, her voice breaking with emotion. "You saved my whole world. My daughter, my mother, they're everything to me." "Just take care of yourself over there," Jake replied gruffly. "Come home safe to your family." As the weeks passed, Mary and Sophia became part of the Morrison household. Sarah delighted in having a baby in the house again, and their teenage daughters, Emma and Beth, competed to see who could make Sophia laugh more. Mary proved to be a capable and grateful houseguest. Despite her injured ankle, she insisted on helping with cooking and cleaning. She had a gift for Mexican cuisine, and soon the Morrison dinner table featured tamales, enchiladas, and other dishes that became family favorites. One evening, as Mary was teaching Sarah how to make her grandmother's salsa recipe, she brought up something that had been weighing on her mind. "I've been thinking about what I'm going to do when my ankle heals completely," Mary said. I can't stay here forever. Even though you've been more than generous. Sarah looked up from the tomatoes she was chopping. Why can't you stay here forever? Mary blinked in surprise. Because this is your home, your family. I can't impose indefinitely. Mary, Sarah said gently. You're not imposing. You're contributing. This house feels more like a home with you and Sophia here than it has in years. Jake, who had been listening from the next room, came into the kitchen. Sarah's right, he said. If you want to stay until Carmen comes back from deployment, you're welcome here. Hell, you're welcome to stay after that if you want. Mary's eyes filled with tears. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking, Jake said firmly. We're offering. The formal recognition ceremony finally took place 6 weeks after the rescue, at the state capitol. Jake had tried to get out of it, but the governor's office insisted, and eventually Sarah convinced him to go. The ceremony was more elaborate than Jake had expected. The governor presented him with the state's Medal of Valor, the highest civilian honor for bravery. Representatives from several organizations were there, including the Red Cross and the National Weather Service. Jake Morrison represents the very best of what it means to be an American, the governor said in his speech. When faced with a crisis, he didn't hesitate. He didn't wait for someone else to take responsibility. He acted with courage, determination, and complete selflessness to save the lives of 2 people he'd never met. Jake stood uncomfortably in his best suit, wishing he could be anywhere else. But when he looked out at the audience and saw Mary sitting in the front row, holding Sophia, he felt a different kind of emotion. Pride. Maybe. Though not in himself. Pride in being part of a community that values helping others. Pride in being the kind of person who doesn't walk away when someone needs help. After the ceremony, there was a reception. Jake found himself surrounded by people wanting to shake his hand and hear the story firsthand. He was polite, but brief. Eager to get back home, Mary approached him as he was preparing to leave. I have something for you, she said, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a small, hand-carved wooden cross. My grandfather made this, she explained. He was a carpenter in Mexico. My grandmother always said it brought protection to whoever carried it. I want you to have it. Jake started to protest, but Mary pressed the cross into his hands. Please, she said. It's the only thing I have of real value, and I can't think of anyone who deserves it more. Jake looked down at the small wooden cross, worn smooth by decades of handling. It was clearly old and precious, a family heirloom that should have stayed in Mary's family. I can't take this, he said quietly. You already saved my family, Mary replied. Now let my family protect yours. 6 months later, Jake was out checking cattle when he heard the sound of a car coming up his driveway. Visitors were still common. Journalists, people wanting to hear the rescue story, organizations wanting to honor him. Jake had gotten better at dealing with the attention, though he still preferred his privacy. But when he saw who was getting out of the car, his face broke into a genuine smile. It was Carmen, back from her deployment in Afghanistan, wearing her army uniform and looking tired but happy. Jake walked over to greet her, and Carmen surprised him by throwing her arms around him in a fierce hug. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for giving me back my family. Carmen's homecoming was celebrated with a big family dinner that included the Morrisons, several neighbors, and friends from town. Sophia, now walking and chattering constantly, delighted everyone by toddling between the adults and demanding attention. During dinner, Carmen announced her plans for the future. I'm not re-enlisting, she said. I want to be close to family. I've been thinking about using my GI Bill benefits to study emergency management. After what happened here, I think that's where I can do the most good. That's a wonderful idea, Sarah said. This community could use someone with your training and experience. Later that evening, as the guests were leaving, Carmen pulled Jake aside. I have a confession, she said. When I first heard about what you did, I thought it was just luck. Right place, right time, you know? But then I heard more details about how long you worked, how you wouldn't give up even when it seemed impossible. That wasn't luck. That was character. Jake was uncomfortable with the praise, as always. I just did what needed doing. Carmen smiled. That's exactly what I mean. Most people would have tried for a little while and then gone for help. You stayed until you got them out. That's not normal, Mr. Morrison. That's exceptional. As the years passed, the tornado and the rescue became part of local legend. The story was told and retold, growing slightly in each telling, until Jake barely recognized it. In some versions, he single-handedly lifted concrete blocks that would have required heavy machinery. In others, he crawled into the collapsed shelter himself to rescue Mary and Sophia. Jake always corrected the exaggerations when he heard them, insisting on the plain truth of what had happened. But people seemed to prefer the larger-than-life version, and eventually Jake gave up trying to set the record straight. Mary and Sophia did stay with the Morrisons, even after Carmen returned from deployment. The families had become so intertwined that separation seemed impossible. Carmen got a job with the County Emergency Management Office, and eventually she and her husband David bought a house just down the road from Jake's ranch. Sophia grew up calling Jake and Sarah Grandpa Jake and Grandma Sarah. And Jake couldn't imagine loving his own granddaughter more than he loved that bright-eyed little girl who had once been near death. In his arms, on the 10th anniversary of the tornado, the community held a memorial service for those who had died and a celebration for those who had survived. Jake was asked to speak, and for once, he agreed. 10 years ago, a tornado took a lot from this community, Jake said, standing at the podium in the high school gymnasium. It destroyed homes and businesses. It scattered families and changed lives forever. But it also showed us something about who we are as people. Jake paused, looking out at the crowd that included many tornado survivors and their families. We learned that when disaster strikes, we don't wait for someone else to help. We don't assume it's not our responsibility. We act. We help our neighbors, even neighbors we've never met. That's not heroism. That's just being human. After the ceremony, Jake was approached by a young reporter from the State University's journalism school. She was writing her senior thesis on heroism in small communities. Mr. Morrison, what do you think makes someone a hero? She asked. Jake thought for a moment, fingering the small wooden cross in his pocket that he'd carried every day for 10 years. I don't think heroes are born, he said finally. I think they're just ordinary people who find themselves in extraordinary situations and choose to act instead of walking away. The real heroes are the ones who do the right thing even when nobody's watching, even when there's no recognition or reward. But you received a lot of recognition for your actions. That was never the point, Jake replied. The point was hearing a baby cry and knowing that I had to help. Everything else was just noise. Today, Jake Morrison is 75 years old and still runs cattle on his family's ranch. The wooden cross Mary gave him remains in his pocket, worn even smoother now by constant handling. Sophia is in college, studying to become a doctor, inspired by the medical professionals who saved her life as a baby. Jake rarely talks about the rescue anymore unless asked directly. When he does, he insists it wasn't heroic, just human decency in action. But the community knows better. They know that not everyone would have worked for hours with bleeding hands to save strangers. They know that not everyone would have refused to give up when the situation seemed hopeless. Jake Morrison saved 2 lives that day, using nothing but his determination and his bare hands. But perhaps more importantly, he reminded an entire community that heroes don't need capes or superpowers. Sometimes, they just need the courage to act when action is required, and the compassion to see every stranger as family worth saving.